Interesting. I have kind of lost my screen.
Oh.
Here. So I've lost it on. Let's try this.
So hovering at the bottom somewhere.
We're getting bigger.
Oh,
All right, one more test. Can everyone hear me okay with no echo? Okay, thank you. Okay, we are at 30.
Okay, everything's set for my
Okay.
end.
The March 25th, 2021 Whatcom County Planning Commission meeting is called to order. I'll do the roll call. Please answer when I call your name. Robert Bartel.
Here.
Kelvin Barton, that's me. Atul Desmani.
Here.
Jim Hansen.
Hello, I'm here.
Thank you. Stephen Jackson.
Here.
Kimberly Lunn.
Here.
John Mayberry.
Here.
Natalie McClendon.
Here.
Dominic Masseri.
Here.
Thank you. You please join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
Liberty and justice
and justice for all.
for all.
Thank you. Now it's time for department update. Mark Personius, it's your turn there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Commissioners. Just a couple things for you on the update. Council introduced an ordinance to adopt an interim moratorium, not an emergency, but an interim. It's just a different legal term, on accepting applications for new outdoor marijuana growing operations this week, I guess, on Tuesday night. And public hearing is scheduled on that moratorium on April 6th at their next meeting. Council P&D Committee, that's the Planning and Development Committee, met to discuss the Planning Commission's public participation advisory group motion, and I'll let Commissioner McClendon tell you all about that in her commissioner comments. Let's see, all else I've got is just a quick calendar update for you. Next meeting, April 8th, will be Josh Fleischman will be with you to cover the open space applications, current use open space applications for this year. Matt will also be there to cover a minor capital improvement plan amendment, and also to update the public participation plan for the new year based on the docket, the new docket that the council adopted earlier this year. I'm going to be out of the office that week, so I won't be at your next meeting, but you'll be in good hands with Matt and with Josh on that. Then the second meeting in April 22nd, will be the public hearing on the S&P update that Cliff's been working with you on. And then we've got, for your May meetings, we've got Josh coming back plugged in to brief you on some potential mineral resource land amendments and process sort of update on where those are. So that's what you've got coming in the near future. And that's all I've got, unless you guys have any questions for me.
Mark, I have a question for you. Given that we are looking at managing some of the larger meetings or trying to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to participate. Do you have, and we have the ability to modify the rules slightly to make that possible for maximum participation. Do you have any thoughts as to how long any of these will go come the next meeting, the open space applications and so on?
That's okay. That's a good question. I think there's in the neighborhood of 7 or 8 open space applications. But Josh is pretty good about, he'll have a PowerPoint, he'll run you through the pictures of the sites, of the parcels and the scoring and all of that, and that'll all be in your packet. The hearing on that, it really depends on which of those property owners show up. And it's kind of been a mixed bag in the past. Some have shown up and testified and some haven't, for whatever reason, but they're all notified of it, of course. So it's kind of hard to predict, Kelvin, exactly how long those are going to take. I don't expect the public hearings on the public participation plan or the CIP amendments to take much time at all.
I'm sorry, it sounds like it should be reasonably small, but before we leave tonight, we should talk about that perhaps if we don't think this, we need to set any special guidelines for this one, that we should put it on our agenda at least to talk about how we're going to handle the critical areas public meeting and how we want to allocate time and how much time and so on. So maybe we can talk about that later tonight, commissioners, if that's okay with you. Okay. All right. Are there any other questions for Mark? All right. Thank you, Mark.
Yep. Thanks, you guys.
Okay. So now is the time for open session for public comment. And I really only see, I think, one attendee. And if you're calling in from the phone, *9 does the raise your hand, which it's Ed Miller there. And it looks like he has already knows how to get his hand up. And *6 to unmute your phone. So Ed, I see your hand up, but go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Yeah, this is Ed Miller once again. You all know me. I'm a wetland biologist here in Bellingham, and I've been involved in the process as I work with the critical areas code all the time. I just wanted to say that, yeah, I'm here in the meeting if anybody has any technical questions later. And also just to say, with respect to some of the things we'll be talking about tonight, that I still have a few concerns with some of the buffer reduction language that staff has adjusted, section 1616-640 CE3, with respect to the amount of mitigation that might be required with buffer reduction. I think, yeah, and there's the potential for requiring, as written, 3 different types of mitigation for buffer reduction, which is a lot more than we have now. And then I know it's on the dock to discuss possibly the type O water definition and what that means. And as written, I have some pretty serious concerns about that. As written, it looks like almost all of the ditches in Whatcom County would become critical areas and have buffers. And that has some serious ramifications, including everyone that has a front yard along a road with a ditch. Everyone's front yard or 25 feet is going to become a buffer. So I'm, again, concerned that we're adding in a whole new class of critical area that is not in the code right now. And as written, and I think it even includes culverts and pipes would become a critical area. So it would be nice if we could kind of look into that a little more. I think that's it with respect to what you've got on the agenda tonight. So thank you for listening.
So
That's all I have, Kelvin. Sorry, I didn't use my 3 minutes.
Commissioner Hanson has a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Ed if for one of these drainage ditches or smaller streams to be considered a critical area, does there have to be presence of fish in that stream?
So actually, right now, as the code is written, the current code, any ditch that has the potential for fish or has ditched any natural stream water is considered a stream and is regulated. If a ditch carries fish right now, it would have a 100-foot buffer under the current code. So this change would pull in every ditch that drains somewhere in Whatcom County. That's my concern, whether fish can get there or not. A lot of times there are barriers to fish, including topographic breaks, vegetation, all of those kind of things. So that's my concern. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So now is the time for commissioner comments. Are there commissioners? I am expecting Commissioner Mayberry, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a brief chat with Mr. Miller today, just so you know.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner McClendon.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on Mr. Personius's comments about our public participation resolution. This is an exercise in being a squeaky wheel. So the council members who participated in the discussion 2 months ago were somewhat concerned about the red tape, whatever you want to call it, of creating an advisory commission, whatever you want to call it, and wanted to do something more ad hoc, quicker. But of course, 2 months later, we're still not made any progress at all because it kind of dropped off their agenda. So I proposed, I tried to propose a very brief resolution that the council could adopt, basically saying, we like this idea, we want somebody to go forward with gathering information and creating recommendations for improved public participation, and we'll take it seriously. So I am going to meet with Councilmember Donovan and county executives to do next week to kind of tweak that resolution so that it's something that they feel comfortable adopting. I mean, they just needed a little more clarity on who was going to do what. I didn't feel like I was my position to tell them what staff to assign or whatever. But anyway, that's where it's at. Hopefully at the next council meeting, so that would be 2 weeks from last Tuesday, they'll have something to consider in the Planning and Development Committee and perhaps adopt at the council meeting that day.
Commissioner McClendon, can you just hold on with us for a moment? Commissioner Desmani.
I just had a commissioner comment. I don't want to interrupt Natalie.
All right. So Commissioner McClendon, did you have more to tell us about? Okay. I do want to say I was going to attend that meeting and then realized that I am taking care of grandkids and it was my day to go pick them up from school. We've been doing this for a year now, and sometimes I forget the schedule, and so I had planned on attending, but a couple little kids needed a ride. Are there any other commissioner comments?
Yes, I have a comment.
Sure, go ahead.
I just wanted to share with the colleagues from Planning Commission that at the marijuana ordinance conversation at county council, one of the county council members said something along the lines of, well, the planning commission recommended this, and pretty much everything they send to us is a good idea. I just wanted to make sure you guys knew that. We're obviously, our credibility is going up apparently here with the county council. So kudos to all of you.
Thank you, Commissioner Tasmani. Okay, we have no other commissioner comments. Next on the agenda is approval of the minutes for March 11th, 2021. Commissioner Mayberry.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
Right, thank you. We have a motion and second to approve the minutes from March 11th. Are there any comments or corrections? Okay, hearing none. Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Mr. Desmani,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Abstain?
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Abstain.
Commissioner Mosseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
6 yeses, 2 abstaining. It carries.
All right, we are now to our main topic for tonight, continuing on with our work session for the shoreline management plan. And I believe we have Cliff here, and is Ryan here too tonight, Cliff?
He's running a little late. Friday Harbor's having their planning commission meeting as well, but he said it should be over by 7.
Okay, thank
So,
you.
good evening, commissioners. How are y'all? So tonight, the things I wanted to try to get done was the follow-up from our last meeting. There were 2 issues that got raised from Commissioner Mayberry's points that we said we would work on, and we provided some language, alternative language in there to try to make sure that we're not double dipping on everything. If we're going to have more discussion on this, I'd like to wait for Ryan to get here because he's more the subject expert on that. So we can circle back on that. Let's see. And then the other was the definitions of the floodplain and floodway. And somebody noticed that we had different definitions still in both Title 16 and Chapter 1616. So we've gone ahead and deleted the definitions from Title 23, because if you recall, we put a line in there that says if something's not defined here, turn to 1616 or Title 20 for the definition. So they're all adopted by reference. And then we updated both the floodplain and the floodway area after listening to Paula. Realized that, you know, there's state definitions, there's federal definitions. But we decided to go with the state definitions and found those in the WACs and just copied those over. So I hope that satisfies everything. The other thing that I wanted to get through, if possible, was to start talking about Exhibit E, the permit processing stuff. I don't know that that's going to take long. I haven't gotten any comments from anybody on that. And the same with the SMP environment designations map. We've made a few amendments to that. I was just going to point those out to you. So if that's good with you, as an agenda, we'll continue. As Mark mentioned, we've advertised your public hearing for April 22nd. We've sent out all those notices. We've sent the documents to the state for review. They sent it out to all the tribes, etc. And I'll be getting back the comments if we get comments on it, which I assume we will. Those should be in by April 12th, and it'll give me a few days at least to try to answer all those. I would urge you, remember we've been updating these exhibits as we go along, and when there's been substantial changes, I've given you new versions. But I think I want to give you all the latest versions of everything for the hearing. And they won't change by the time we get to the hearing. We might make some recommendations for changes based on comments, but there will be that. I'd make sure to go through, remember to search for the clause note to PC. Those are they're just planning P/C. If you do that, you'll find all the changes that you guys have made and all the changes, the minor changes we've made since, but we haven't really gone over all of them with you because they're mostly grammar and a few little things. So that makes sense for you all? Okay. Then let's go on to Title 22. Let me find that. Sorry, I gotta get things organized here. It's hard having sharing things, and I need 3 screens now. I've found. There we go. All right, everybody can see that. There's Title 22 and ready to go. So in your last memo, the one dated, what was it, March 2nd, and I suggested you re-review that for tonight's meeting. I outlined the biggest changes to Title 22. And let's see. Sorry, there's just not enough room for me to see everything on these things. There it is. All right, so once again, we've reorganized the layout of the whole SMP, and we've taken all the permitting stuff, following up from, you remember like 2 or 3 years ago, Amy and Nick came to you and they pulled all the permitting processes out of Title 20 and put them in 22. So I'm continuing that as we go through different code amendments. I'm continuing that with the SMP and taking all the permit processing provisions out of 23 and putting them into 22. So in 2205, there are a few amendments that deal with the SMP, but the SMP also has additional requirements that didn't seem to fit within those. So I've created a new chapter for additional requirements of shoreline permits and exemptions. We've revised the language to cite updated substantial development cost thresholds. We had added the reference to statutory exceptions to local review for the SMP. We've revised the language to include the shoreline permit exemption for retrofitting existing structures to comply with ADA. And we've revised it to cite the updated cost thresholds for dock construction. The state updates those cost thresholds every 6 or 7 years, something like that. Additionally, we've updated it for consistencies with Ecology's updated permit filing procedures and define the special procedures for WSDOT projects per the WAC. So those are all kind of requirements, the state requirements that we've dealt with. Updating the SMP to align with our Title 22 permit procedures. So, you know, that whole table that you guys helped put together with Amy and Nick, made a few amendments to that to address the shoreline permits, how they work now. And we've revised on the Cherry Point amendments that you and the council worked on. We've incorporated those into this as well. So I don't know, does any of the commissioners have any questions on Title 22? No?
I'm not seeing any hands coming up, Cliff, so, oh, sorry, there we go. Commissioner Hanson.
I think Commissioner Mayberry had his hand up first.
Well, we can go with Commissioner Mayberry, but I'm gonna blame it on the computer. 'Cause it put-
Okay, I just wanted to verify, Cliff, that you've just reorganized things so that there are no particular changes of requirements. They're just organized in a better fashion. Is that correct?
Organized into our permit, our Title 22, which is becoming our permit procedures title. So everything from 23 came into here. And then those couple of changes I mentioned, cost thresholds for docks and was it redevelopment or keep losing my place here. The substantial development cost threshold, dock threshold, dock cost threshold, and those other statutory requirements that I just mentioned. So those have been incorporated into here, and you'll see those in the strikeout underline.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I was just wondering, are you asking us to make amendments just yet, or?
Just like the rest of this thing, I'm presenting it to you to see if you have any issues with any of the things we've done.
All right, well then, I only have two here, but 22.05.050.
050. Yep.
If a permit is denied, basically you have to wait 1 year to reapply. Is that existing? Or from the existing?
It is, yeah. You'll notice the comment here that we just moved it over from 23.
Okay. And the only other one that I had, it's 22.07.030 under D. Basically stating that if your neighbors have done previous development, then you're going to take that into account for future development. Can you just explain that a little bit?
Sure. So RCW 9058-020, which is cited here, that's where this comes from. And this language, originally we had struck it, but then as the note says, I reinstated it because in talking with DOE folks, they said we need to comply with this section here. And basically it, just like in this, for the critical areas regulations, we're required to look at cumulative impacts. Now that doesn't necessarily mean, you have a neighbor that does one thing and that affects what you have to do, or you have to mitigate for that. But it does mean that we're supposed to kind of look in the long run, are things continuing to, if we continue to allow a bunch of development, say around a particular shoreline or a big wetland or something, like a really nice wetland, if you do one, maybe no big deal, especially if you mitigate. But if you start doing the same thing over and over to the point where, your lake's surrounded by houses, and then you have phosphorus issues like Whatcom, how do we address those things? So it doesn't mean that you can't do what you want to do, but if there are cumulative impacts that rise to a level of significance, then we have to address those.
How far back are we looking?
I don't think there's any date in mind. It's just, is there as we progress, are things getting worse and worse or are they remaining the same or improving? And, you know, we're supposed to meet this no net loss standard. And so we're not supposed to, just because we keep, you know, approving a house and a house and a house and a house all along the shoreline, eventually that shoreline's kind of gone, right? And so we're supposed to acknowledge that and plan for it and revise our plans if things aren't getting or are getting worse over time.
I
So
guess,
yeah, it's not making any one person make up for past sins. It's for us to think about our policies not doing their job in establishing no net loss.
I guess so. If the policy is no net loss, or then shouldn't that take care of itself? If we're actually following the guidance?
Well, I can't remember. Were you on the commission when we first started this whole thing about 2.5 years ago? I did a presentation on what no net loss means. And there's a memo, and if you don't remember, I can send that back to you. But essentially, the state acknowledges that each individual development is going to cause some loss, right? Your regulations should kind of, you know, if say a development, the land is at this level and you do some development and it drops below this, you know, what your existing conditions are, you do mitigation, you can bring it back up, but overall, there's always going to be some loss. And to make up for that, the county is supposed to implement its restoration plan. So if you recall, there's an adopted restoration plan that lists all these kind of big projects that the county is supposed to be working on, some of which, well, not necessarily the county, but, you know, through our partners with the tribes and the salmon recovery team and some of the nonprofits that are doing some of these things. They've done some of these projects that are in our restoration plan, and as has the county. So you might have a loss of ecological function, say along the shoreline of Lake Whatcom. I mean, we all know that there's all the kinds of houses around there, and it's not functioning as a pristine lake shore. But in allowing houses or allowing development along it, we mitigate as much as possible for each individual development. There's still going to be a little bit of loss overall, and then we're supposed to make that up through the restoration plan and implement those restoration programs.
Okay, I just thought the whole point of the mitigation and enhancement was to actually bring it back up to no net loss. So
not quite. We're supposed to get as close as possible with it, but you know, a house is a house. It's going to take trees down.
okay. Yes, I'm still concerned that this is it's vague enough that it'd be a blank check to deny development. But I'll turn it over to the rest of the commissioners here.
Commissioner Desmond.
Thank you. So I share Commissioner Mayberry's concerns on this particular issue. Looking at it from a different perspective, I don't know how much this issue of how a prior action from one property owner essentially kind of takes up the right to development that a subsequent property owner would have. Is this in other parts of the land use code? And if it is, has it been legally challenged at any time?
Well, it's also in the critical areas regulations. We are supposed to address cumulative impacts, just like this, whenever, you know, for all projects. And in real life, what it means is that the environmental consultants are supposed to write a paragraph or two about what they think that the cumulative impacts might be. We're not going around looking for them as staff, but we're relying on the consultants to let us know if there are cumulative impacts. In general, there's nothing that we would get too wigged out about.
I want to bring up the possibility of a situation where when there's issues with the next proposed development around the lake, for example, where a new developer would have incremental requirements that may fall solely on the new project and would not go to the previously permitted project, which basically would treat two people differently based because one got their project done before the others. Is that something that happens, and is that something that's happening?
It doesn't happen. It happens more on a global scale, I think. It's like, so let's take Lake Whatcom for instance. A lot of people have developed around there, and each year, not each year, but every few years, we seem to tighten up the stormwater regulations, the landscape regulations, the tree protection regulations, because what we keep seeing is, attempt A didn't cut it, so we, do we do the next version of it, and in fact, council's just docketed some more, for us to revise the regulations and tighten them up even a little bit more. So you can say that all those people in the past, they didn't have to protect trees, or they could put in lawns, etc. But these days, people have to deal with stricter regulations. And that's what we're looking for, is what are these cumulative impacts, and do we need to revise the regulations to address them if things aren't working well?
Thank you.
Hanson, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a general comment about the relationships between mitigation and no net loss. There have been movements periodically, and I think perhaps presently in the legislature, to require net gain, or what they call uplift, I believe, because there's a realization that all these systems that we've come up with are not functioning adequately to meet the objective. And one thing I've found in my life in business and other relationships is a plan means nothing unless it's implemented. So these giving credit to having a restoration plan is pretty ephemeral. So another reason that we should be very scrupulous about guarding against additional loss.
Thank you. Commissioner Lund.
I was just going to make a comment that practically developers today face impacts all the time from changes in code or regulation. And I'm dialing in from my neighborhood where the Jones family sold to develop what became the Plat of Breeza. And there are homes in this neighborhood that have swimming pools 40 feet from the ordinary high water mark with green lawn. And now they're looking at developing the rest of their land, and they have hundreds of feet of setbacks for the lots that they'd like to develop. So practically, we learn as we go, and yeah, what went before doesn't necessarily mean that that should be the standard and the lens that we use for today.
Thank you. Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I'd agree, except that requires change in code and policy on a little more thorough and thought out process. This basically just gives, I'm assuming, the director the ability to be more stringent if he just decides to. So I'm a little more, I'm still concerned about this language and the vagueness of it, or how it could be used.
Do we have any more comments here on this, Commissioner? Cliff, would you go ahead?
Okay, well, I really have nothing else on Title 22 unless the commission does. And if there's not going to be any changes to it, then I'll consider this good for the public hearing.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, just going back to D, is there a way that we could still incorporate RCW 90.58.020 without? I didn't get a chance to read that exact RCW, but if we need to have reference to that, I'm not necessarily opposed to it, but the rest of the language,
Would you like me to pull that RCW up now? And
that'd be great.
okay, let me find it. I'm perusing it real quick to find the part that should matter. No, let me go ahead and pull it over here for you. So these are the legislative findings for preferences of use in the shoreline. I'm not going to read this all to you, but let's see. So this spells out the preference of uses in the following order of preference, which recognize and protect the statewide interest over local interests, preserve the natural character of the shoreline, result in long-term over short-term benefit, protect the resources and ecology, increase public access, increase recreational opportunities, and provide for any other element defined in here. So, sorry, I'm having to read this. I wasn't. Let me see if there's a. So it doesn't mention cumulative impacts per se. Well, rather than trying to figure out right here, why don't Ryan and I work on that and see what we can come up with.
Thank you, Cliff. Commissioner Mayberry.
Ed, I'd like to just make a motion here, see what everybody thinks. In section D, there, I would like to strike in at the very beginning of the sentence. And then strike from starting at consideration.
Oops, wrong one. So I'm just, oops. Yeah, keep going, and I'll type it along as we go so that we can see what you're talking about.
Okay, so strike from starting at consideration all the way down to actions on the fourth line. Just before should. Yep.
There.
Including strike actions.
Ah.
And then strike also.
Got it. Did I capture it correctly for you?
Yeah. So motion would be to strike this language so that it would read, the granting of all shoreline substantial development permits should remain consistent with the policy of RCW 90.58.020 and should not produce significant adverse effects to the shoreline ecological functions and processes or other users.
I would second that.
We have a motion and a second. Commissioners, do you have comments on it? Speak to the motion. We'll hold for a minute. Well, Cliff, are you got all your notes in there?
Yep, I'm just taking notes so that I remember what happened tomorrow.
Commissioner Masseri?
Yeah, I'm still kind of thinking through this. One, I want to make sure that whatever we do is, is per what we're required to. I'm also curious if this is a state requirement. Other jurisdictions must have these kind of clauses in there, so I'm curious what they've done. And then sometimes even when we are, often when we're required to follow a specific RCW, we do give some kind of reference to the intent of it, just so that somebody who's reading our code doesn't continually have to flop back to the state code. I believe is pretty common for us. So I just want to make sure we're not making this less friendly for people to use.
Commissioner McClendon?
I'd like to ask Commissioner Mayberry what he thinks the significant difference is for his amendment.
Just, it takes out the cumulative impacts from other or previous development or the potential for future development, and just points directly to the RCW. That's the main thing.
Commissioner Masseri?
Yeah, so I guess based on if we go forward to this motion, Cliff, how do you see this changing how the permits are being handled as they come in?
I really don't. The critical areas regulations already require that we look at cumulative impacts, and it's part of the SMP. So, but I thought Ryan would be here by now. But I will talk it over with him, and if the commission does vote to for Commissioner Mayberry's motion, and we find in our review, we find that you've made a grave error, we'll point it out to you at your next meeting, at your public hearing.
Wait, at the public hearing, you're going to tell everybody that the planning commission made a grave error? Sorry, Chair.
It was tongue in cheek, come on, hyperbole.
Cliff, so is this kind of like what it does is it was in the middle of D that it told a little more of the action that you had to take, and now that action is removed, but the RCW still points you to the end result?
I think so, but I need to talk it over with Ryan. Because I didn't see the words cumulative impacts in that RCW at all, so that's what confused me.
Okay. Are there any other comments on the motion? So, Kimmy, can you read the motion back?
Certainly. So the motion is in section D of 22.07.030 to strike the language "in" at the beginning of the sentence, then strike "consideration through actions" and strike "also."
All right, Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Tisbani,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson,
No.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
No.
Commissioner Masseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
7 yeses, 2 nos, that carries.
Okay. Anything else we'd like to discuss in Title 22?
Commissioner Mayberry.
I'd like to make a motion that we tentatively passed Title 22 as amended.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Commissioner Desmani, did you have more that you would like to say?
No, that's fine.
Thank you. Commissioner Hanson, go ahead.
I just wonder if provisionally might be more appropriate than tentatively.
It works for me.
Are you proposing that your motion be amended, Commissioner Mayberry?
Yes.
And Commissioner Desmani, are you okay with
Yeah.
it?
Yes.
All right. So we've amended it. Right. Is there any discussion on the motion? So, Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmani,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Yes.
Commissioner Mosseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
That carries 9-0.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Right. Cliff, would you take us to the next section, please?
Yes, sir.
I have a point of order.
Yes, Commissioner Desmani, go ahead.
I appreciate that Cliff, that you're good at predicting, but I really would ask you not to put how the vote's going to come out before the vote comes out, please.
You know, as soon as I typed that, I thought, oh no, I'm in trouble now. I'm just trying to be efficient.
I know, but we really shouldn't do that.
Yep, all right. I
I
should
will
stop.
rule to uphold Commissioner Desmani's point of order. Cliff, would you please go ahead?
Sure. All right, the last thing for you to review is this shoreline environment designations map that Sarah, our GIS expert, put together. And what we've done on that is update all the city and UGA boundaries. Any properties that are on the Lummi Nation that are under tribal jurisdiction, we've updated with the tribal shoreline designation. And I think you guys are aware, but over the last few years, the assessor has been correcting all their assessor parcel maps, making them because they didn't line up before. And so now we've corrected all the designations where they show on here to actually match the parcels. So that was a cleanup task. We have, you'll recall, Paula mentioned that they're the FEMA is undergoing a map revision now, but since the last time that we adopted this map, they had done some work on it as well. So we've updated the shoreline jurisdiction of the floodway and the floodplain to match the most recent, though it's not the newest because it hasn't come out yet, but the most recent FEMA floodplain and floodway maps. And so that expanded the resource designation, this green, from Ferndale to Linden up in here. So some of this got wider, some of it got a little narrower. It basically just changed it. It doesn't really matter because this map is really just showing where, giving people an idea of where they are, but the text has remained the same and as to what's in the jurisdiction. and the text actually controls. Up here in this little area up here, between kind of Linden and Blaine, there's a whole bunch of beaver ponds up in there. And we've added those because they've grown in size to over the 20-acre threshold for being a water of the state. They were actually looked at the last time we did our SMP, but they hadn't gotten quite that big. And so they weren't designated, but now they do. So they fall under that category.
Cliff, could you pause for a moment?
Sure.
Commissioner McClendon, I saw your hand was up earlier. Did you have something you wanted to ask Cliff?
Well, I was looking for the newer version of the map, but I do have a question. Where are the beaver ponds?
So you see my little cursor going around in
Oh,
circles?
way up there. Okay.
Yep, those they're all circled in yellow. And in total, they add up over 20 acres of water.
Okay.
Isn't that right next to the hornet's nest?
Yes, the murder hornet ponds.
Sorry. That Commissioner Mayberry, go ahead.
I just had a question about the Shoreline Conservancy. I guess it'd be south of Everson through there. Did anything change in there?
South of Everson, like I said, we updated the boundaries of these things to match the FEMA maps that, showing where the floodway and the floodplains are. So there is some widening and narrowing throughout. I can't point to each individual spot, but overall it kind of remained the same. So yeah, there'll be some. It doesn't mean that it doesn't really change the fact, though, that one is in the shoreline jurisdiction, because that's set by law. I mean, it's set by the text in our code and the text in the Shoreline Management Act. So this is just kind of showing what the new mapping does for us.
Is there a previous map that we could look at to compare?
Yeah, but it's not digitized. All we have is a paper copy. It's really old and funky. I suppose Sarah might be able to produce a map that shows the differences. I can ask her if you need.
That would be nice. And so none of the designations have changed?
No, we haven't touched any of our designations.
Okay.
Commissioner Hanson.
Where are all those ditches we've been informed are now critical areas?
Oh, they're not shoreline or waters of the state, so they're not showing up on there. The last thing I want to point out is, where is it? It's hard to see on this thing. Let me zoom in here. 25. This little pond here. So here's Everson, and there's a pond here. And during our last update, it was given a resource environment designation, but it's been determined that was done in error because, well, at the time there was not much guidance on it, but it is a mining pond, and DOE's guidance on these is to not designate them as water. They're not waters of the state until they've implemented a restoration plan, and then it becomes a water of the state. So we've taken it off for now, and that was at the owner's request.
I'd like to point out that Ryan Erickson has joined us now, and he does have his hand up. Ryan, go ahead.
So there used to be a shoreline map on the county website, Cliff, that.
Oh, was there?
Yeah, I'm looking to see if it's still up.
It is still. I looked at it a couple of years ago.
Oh, there it goes. Yeah, it's still there.
Where do I go?
I Googled Whatcom County Shoreline Master Program map.
Okay. The one labeled new
Yep.
from 10 years ago or whatever.
Yep, that's the one.
All right. I don't know how to show this to you side by side, though. Let me see if I can. Do it top to bottom or something. Well, we can kind of see some differences here. So for instance, most of this is all the same. There's a little tail that goes up in here. This area here has gotten a little wider. This is expanded out a little bit.
And Cliff, I know I got on late, but this was always regulated.
Right. Yeah, I mentioned that to him.
Okay.
I told him that it's the text and the growth or the SMA that actually dictates whether you're in the jurisdiction or not. This map is just helpful for people to see where they are easily. No, 200 to 150. No. Page width. There we go. All right. So most of all of this is seems like it's all about the same. As I pointed out, it's this little notch here is a little bigger than it used to be. This area in here is a little wider.
Can you hold just a moment, Cliff? Commissioner Desmonte, go ahead.
Is there any case where the boundaries have shrunk? That's one question. The other question is, could someone remind me what that purple natural means as far as a legend of designated classification?
Yeah, it's one of our designations, and it's applied to areas that will never be developed. It's just natural areas like in the national forest, etc. There's not too many of them. I think that's about the extent of it. Maybe down south, yeah, down south at the headwaters of all the rivers. There's a little bit on Lake Whatcom on the east side. Oh, there's around, what's that lake over there? DNR Lake, Lake Tennant?
Carroll.
Carroll. And yeah, I recall Sarah pointing some areas out that got narrower, but I can't see them at this scale right now.
Commissioner,
the map's just helping people find their property and kind of giving a quick view of whether they're in the jurisdiction or not. The language of the code actually dictates whether you are or not.
Makes sense. I'll make a motion to approve the new map.
we have a motion to approve the new map. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second to approve the new map. Do we have any discussion? Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmonte,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Yes.
Commissioner Mosseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yes.
That carries 9-0.
Okay, well, you guys are gonna hate me, but I have nothing else to go over with you. So unless the commission has issues to talk about, I don't.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to chapter 16, talk about the change in language.
Okay, let me get into that document for you. I'll keep this up. And state code. Yeah, I'll switch that over and put that one there. All right, so we are, the first one was 16, no, where'd it go? That's the wrong memo, dang it. Land Commission, 325. All right, so the first one is 1616-640. CE. There it is. Okay, so, and Mr. Chair, do you mind if I just let Ryan know what was talked about a minute ago about this issue?
Go ahead.
So Ryan, Ed Miller spoke to the commission during the public portion and did mention that he's still not sure about the language that we substituted here. He seemed to think that we were requiring 3 different types of mitigation for the same area. Anyways, all right, Mr. Mayberry.
We'll just hold here for a moment so everyone gets a chance to read it.
Yep.
Sorry, yeah, that was Ed's concern.
Yeah, so when Ryan and I looked at this, we thought from your discussion that it wasn't clear, that it seemed open-ended in the amount of mitigation that could be required. And so what we tried to tie it to was equal to no more than the area impacted, so that it was clear that we're not going to ask for unlimited amount of mitigation on these things.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I think Ed's point was this is in addition to mitigation as well as enhancement of buffers. So adding this would be a third level of mitigation, basically.
Ryan, go ahead.
I recommend we strike it.
Commissioner Mayberry.
I'll make a motion to strike number 3 there.
I'll second that.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to strike bullet 3 under section E. Is there any discussion? Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
I had a question.
Just a moment. We just got some hands coming up, and it would be Commissioner Mosseri.
Can Ryan explain a little bit more than why he says to strike it now, since they just modified it?
Yeah, and that's my question too.
Easy. We can get to the same path using a habitat management plan. This was supposed to be flexibility. If it's causing consternation, we can strike it. It's still allowed as a mitigation option in other parts of the code. It's not supposed to be in addition to, and again, if it's causing confusion, I'd rather just strike it than discuss it for much longer.
Yeah, I thought that it was actually a benefit to somebody who was trying to get this buffer reduction. It gave them an option. They don't have to go for the buffer reduction. So I thought that it was actually a tool for somebody to use.
And that tool is still available through the other parts of the code. Doesn't have to be here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any more questions or discussion? Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, in staff's memo, they brought up another part in the code that supposedly also had this language. It's 1616 740. If we're gonna remove it from here, it'd be nice to remove it from both places.
Right, so if the motion contains both of those, I will make that change in a minute. Actually, I can split us up here.
Commissioner Mayberry, would you like to amend the motion?
Yes, I'll amend the motion to include this, the other section 16.16.740.c.1.f.3.
And was it Commissioner Jackson had the second on this?
Yes.
Are you okay with this amendment, Commissioner Jackson?
If Ryan's okay with it.
Yeah. And Commissioner McClendon, would you go ahead, please?
So I'm interested in knowing where else in the code does it give this option? I mean, then you suddenly said, there it is in the code elsewhere, and you want to take that out too. So I'm trying to keep up here.
Sorry. Tom called.
Just, we'll give you a minute or two there.
Ryan, I think they're waiting on your response.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to blur it out or without raising my hand. The option to do this is in the habitat management plan. So the same language we're striking out, the ability to do offsite, onsite, in kind, out of kind is in the mitigation section.
Commissioner Hanson, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to verify that the second striking wasn't the one that it was redundant to, but apparently if it's in the mitigation section, they're both redundant, and I'll continue under that presumption.
Okay. Is there any more questions or discussion? Tammy, will you read the motion back for us, please?
All right. Can I actually get the number of the second one that you were striking, Commissioner Mayberry?
Yeah, it is 16.16.740.c.1.f.3.
Okay, thank you. I missed the 1F, so that's perfect. Okay, so the motion is to strike 16.16.640 CE3 and 16.16.740 C1F3.
Okay. Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmani,
Abstain.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Yes.
Commissioner Mosseri,
No.
Mr. Barton?
Yes.
Okay, 7 yeses, 1 no, and 1 abstain. So that carries.
What was the tally? Sorry, 7?
7, 1, and 1 abstaining.
Okay. Copy, and that's that too. Okay, got them recorded.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, just moving on to the next bit of staff's proposed new language. I'd like to look at 16.16.640.c.3. And I'd like to make a motion to adopt staff's new language.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adopt staff's new language. I will not try to cite back to you the reference. Is there discussion on this? Tammy, you have the reference?
I do.
Okay. Would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel?
We got a hand come up. Commissioner Mayberry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure that also included 16.16.740.c.2. They're the same, but it wasn't in my original motion.
And who was our second on this?
Jackson, and that's fine.
Okay, so we have amended.
Okay.
Okay, is there discussion since it's been amended? Okay, Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
All right. Commissioner Bartel?
Yes.
Commissioner Desmani?
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson?
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson?
Yes.
Commissioner Lund?
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry?
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon?
Yes.
Commissioner Mosseri?
Yes.
Commissioner Barton?
Yes.
That carries 9-0.
Commissioner Mayberry.
I don't want to rush Cliff too fast here, but after he's done, I'd like to talk about ditches. So specifically at 16.16.710.c.1.a.5 Roman numeral.
Sorry, what was it? 710, you said?
Yep, 710 C.
This
There.
one?
Yeah, we're getting there. Yeah. So bringing up what Ed was saying at the beginning of our meeting, I think it's important that we don't inadvertently create critical areas along every ditch in the county. And the way that the way that type O waters reads now, it would include that. Problem being not that you might necessarily want to plant a house within 25 feet of the road, but it would require to maintain that 25-foot buffer from the ditch as if it was a critical area requiring native vegetation, not being able to perform any kind of maintenance along the frontage of your property. So I want to make a motion to add at the end of that definition, after or wetland, and insert the language excluding artificial ditches.
May I ask you a question?
You shoot.
So I don't know if you noticed B here, but this was a big issue the last time we revised this, the CAO. And we really were trying to make it so that purely artificial ditches were not regulated. And so, but under the state regulations, if they're used to convey waters of the state prior to human alteration, or the water is used for fish, or it flows directly into a shellfish habitat conservation area, then those ditches are actually regulated by Fish and Wildlife already. So that's why our code mimics this. If we stick artificial in here, that's kind of contradictory to this.
Yeah, I understand, but I think that you're already contradicting. I mean, type O waters under this definition would include ditches. It just, I mean, I see the the definition of ditches right below that, but that would mean that they're both. Am I wrong?
So the ditches in little b would be considered type O, and they'd have a smaller buffer. If we don't have a type O, then they get a 50-foot buffer instead of a 25.
Okay, I still think that's a problem. So if there's a way that we can not put buffers on ditches, that's where I'm trying to get.
Right, but if they're ditches or artificial watercourses that meet B3 is the little I3 is a Whatcom Countyism, but the 1 and 2 is mandated by the state. So they want to regulate those types of ditches as streams. The state does. And if we want to maintain them, you mean like clean them out to make sure that they don't back up and that water can still flow and things like that, then we should change the allowed uses to allow that maintenance of them.
I'm not worried about the maintenance of the ditches themselves. The county is the one that does that. So I'm concerned about the 25 feet.
So technically those ditches right now, as of today, have a 50-foot buffer because they're considered non-fish, or if they have fish in it, they have a 100-foot buffer.
Okay, I think that would be a surprise to most people.
I think it would be too. If it's an ongoing agricultural operation, we don't actually, they're allowed to be inside that buffer, so they don't have a buffer.
Yeah, it's not so much the agricultural that I worry about. It's people's front yard.
And it happens a lot, especially on like our public works projects and stuff, when people are getting right-of-way permits and then they realize that that ditch in front of their house is a fish-bearing ditch and they got a 100-foot buffer and they got to put in a 36 or 48-inch culvert. So
right, but we're not talking about fish-bearing ditches. We're talking about any ditch, basically every ditch in the county.
So yeah, it's true.
Commissioner,
So if we have a suggestion on how to fix it, then that's fine. But technically, if you applied B the way that it's written now, then each one of those non-fish ones would have a 50-foot buffer.
Commissioner Mayberry, are you okay pausing for a moment and letting Commissioner Desmonte speak?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Commissioner Desmonte.
My question is about the and or under B1. And also, I'd like to make sure I know the definition of waters of the state. Shouldn't it be just or, is what I mean after B1 then? Because or is more strong than and or. I'm not sure why it's and or, is what I'm asking.
Go ahead, Ryan.
You can get rid of and, I mean, from a grammatical standpoint, or includes and.
And then please make sure I have the correct understanding of the term waters, or you're fine.
Yeah, I'm finding it. There it is. Waters of the state mean all lakes, rivers, ponds, streams, inland waters, underground waters, salt waters, and other surface waters and water courses within the jurisdiction of Washington state pursuant to that. I think, and then in our SMP, this isn't the SMP, but the SMP actually lists what all those are.
It includes puddles, correct?
Puddles?
Yes.
Beaver ponds.
Depends on what kind of puddle, I guess.
Depends what's living in the puddle.
But the state does own the water in the state. They just let us use it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm confused about why all those terms when it really means that any water that falls from the sky is waters of the state.
I don't know how to answer that, I guess.
It's fine. It's fine. Okay, it's fine. No more questions.
Commissioner Hanson, go ahead.
I'm just confused by why we're discussing making changes to our SMP that would make it inconsistent with state law.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, this wasn't my intention to be inconsistent with state law. It was my understanding that, and I believe Ed's understanding as well, he's an expert, that we don't currently have 25 or any buffer off of ditches that don't have fish in them. So just wanted to make sure that we weren't creating a massive new increase in critical areas.
I know we have a definition of ditch in here. I'm trying to get to it. There it is.
And we have some commissioners waiting. We'll get to you. Commissioner Desmani, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Would it be appropriate to ask Consultant Ed Miller to speak to this issue because he had expressed a concern about it?
Yes, I can ask me and I will grant that. Ed Miller, are you able to answer Commissioner Desmani's question?
Sure, I'm here.
So the question is, you had raised at the beginning of the meeting some comments about the additional expansion of critical areas to ditches, and staff was just clarifying. You heard the discussion. So what are we missing?
Yeah, I don't know, as a practitioner, I mean, this is kind of confusing for me. So currently, right now, artificial ditches are not regulated as a critical area. unless, like Ryan said, they have fish or they conveyed natural streams. So you can see that part was struck out in part BI. So that's the current. So the way we treat that now, when we do a critical area study on anyone's property, the streams are regulated. And if they have ditches, we see, can fish get into them? Or was there a natural stream that was ditched? If that's the case, then that's treated like a stream. Any other ditch on the property that either doesn't have fish in it or doesn't convey a natural stream is an artificial feature and not regulated as a critical area. And I believe that's consistent with state law now as written. So what this looks like it's doing is both parts. The definition of type O water would include any ditch that drained to any other water, which again is most of the ditches. And a ditch, what constitutes a ditch is much less than a stream. It just has to convey water. It doesn't have to have a bed and a bank. So, I mean, it could be a pretty small ditch. And looks like it's reiterated there under B single I, where that was changed. It says used to convey waters of the state, which, as you pointed out, is almost anything. So essentially, both the type O water definition and the B single I will pull in all of the ditches almost and put a buffer on them, where we don't have that now. I mean, I'm not an expert on state law, but state regulates waters of the state, but they don't put buffers on them necessarily. That's the county. That's my understanding.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Lund.
Well, I would like to hear Ryan's response to that, because I thought I heard his earlier comments say that type O waters actually have a larger buffer than what this would give them. So it would move it from, in this case, the ditch from 50 to 25. So if he can just kind of clarify.
Sure. The state under WAC 365-196-200, the definition of fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas do not include such artificial features or constructs as irrigation delivery systems, irrigation infrastructure, irrigation canals, or ditches that lie within the boundaries that are maintained by a port district or an irrigation company. It's all about irrigation ditches. That's the only artificial feature that's not considered a fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas that are considered water to the state. So all the other waters are technically regulated under the critical areas ordinance under WAC 365-196-200. So that's why we're changing this.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but I thought you said you wanted to create this type of water so that we could put a lesser buffer on it than what it would normally have.
Correct.
Under the other types.
That was the intent, was to not regulate those as fully functioning habitat areas. And so that's where it comes down to. And again, I mean, Ed's right. Our existing CAO did not regulate a lot of this. Our existing CAO technically did not meet the requirements of the state law. And so I had tried to remedy this in a manner that seemed somewhat reasonable. But then again, it's, that I read you what the WAC says. Our code has not been compliant with that section since it was indoctrinated in 1992. So you guys can decide what you think is best for Whatcom County.
Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, I just think requiring a 25-foot buffer on a ditch that's right next to a road, and if there's going to be contamination of that water, it's coming from the road. So then to expect the property owner to maintain a critical area on the other side of it just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me.
Commissioner Desmond.
I wanted to express that I like this idea of wanting to create a special category for, like this is for lack of a better term, non-irrigation ditches. And the reason is they aren't the same thing as other forms of where, water is flowing. And I like the idea of having, narrower buffers and or less constraints on those. And I don't see a way to do that without explicitly calling them out as Brian is suggesting as far as code changes. And I do have concerns about people's residential and ag practices around ditches that are quite obviously putting nutrients directly into the ditches, and it's like stormwater. If we can't put septic into a stormwater drain, why are there so many practices? When I travel the county, I bike the county, I look in ditches and I see all kinds of nutrient-rich materials going into ditches, particularly out in the county where I see it the most. So.
I have a question for Cliff or Ryan, and do you know how many counties around the state are requiring buffers on the ditches, like we're speaking of?
I don't know off the top of my head, but.
Go ahead, Ryan.
I know of one that I can point to because that's where we got the typo from. And they actually regulate every single thing. They don't have the exception of it being connected to a type S or F. It's the whole thing. I would also like to state that I was told by George Boggs when they updated the critical areas ordinance back in the day and created CPAL, that flows directly into shellfish habitat conservation areas was supposed to mean any water course that was connected down the line to the shellfish area was supposed to regulate into critical areas. And so that's what they meant when they put that in, flows directly into a shellfish habitat conservation area. And so that is not how Whatcom County has been implementing it as a policy, but that is what I was told was the reason why little I3 is there. It was to protect in the 90s when Portage and Drayton shellfish protection districts went into effect. They added that line that any waters that flowed into those, they originated up by Everson, they were supposed to apply to the critical areas. And that's not how we've been applying it. And I know that Ed can attest that we have not been applying it that way.
Commissioner McClendon.
So I'm reading this whole section, subsection A, small a, where it says all water bodies that meet the criteria for type SF, NP, or NS waters are set forth in the WAC as now or hereafter amended, and then it lists them and describes them, but it doesn't mention type O, and so I'm a little confused as to why we have this new small v Roman numeral 5 here about type O in this section. It seems like it's an add-on that doesn't fit the section. And so I don't quite understand how it fits. I don't know. And I'm just thinking that, what you're really talking about are ditches. And I'm wondering if this small Roman numeral 5 needs to go in with B to more clearly define how ditches are defined and how some are regulated and some aren't. I don't know, maybe that's making more complication than it's worth, but
Commissioner Testimony.
I guess as a follow-up to Commissioner McClendon's question is, are typo always ditches?
And Ryan, you had your hand up there to speak. Would you?
Yeah, so my intention of typo, and it may have gotten lost in all these changes, was to apply to more than just ditches. There are certain features that technically could probably be considered a type N, but have been so heavily modified by human interaction that they no longer function 100% as even a type N, but they're regulated as such. And I was hoping that those could also be regulated to a lesser extent.
Then Commissioner Testimony, go ahead.
Sorry, just clarification. Then, like, so you've already got the category type N. Could you give an example of typo waters that would not include it, that would not be in the category of a ditch? And maybe you could modify the definition of type N to include those, and then leave typo to be specifically a ditch kind of category. Just a suggestion.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, so type S, F, and NP and NS are defined by the state. And I feel really comfortable legally when we type things by how the state defines things, because then we on a legal
I remember that
standpoint-
now. You explained that. Right, I remember.
And then so typo is our own. We created our own. We can call it whatever we want. Whatever we want to include in those. But the idea is, and I'll use a stream that I know about in Silver Beach area because I live right by it. But basically, it was a stream. It was about 1.5 feet wide. And then Whatcom County came in and did a flood improvement project on the stream and widened it to 15 feet, put in 3 feet of gravel, a spall for dead storage, and it created a 90-degree turn. Above that is a series of weir systems that go into a type 2 structure that then goes across the street and up through another culverted system, another type 2, and then eventually up to a ditch that then eventually goes into the original stream. So that stream system has been so heavily modified that the United States Department of Army Corps has determined that it's no longer waters of the United States, but we still regulate it in Whatcom County. And so I'm trying to capture those types of situations that we've so heavily modified the existing system that it no longer fully supports its intended, what it naturally had intended to be. That was the idea for typo. And I may have missed the mark. And so that was just where I was trying to go with it.
And I just want to, just a quick question for Cliff. Cliff, if this code were to be approved all the way through county council, do you suppose that Whatcom County would have a program to start requiring ditches to be buffered if this were in fact Whatcom County code?
I guess I'd have to talk to Mark about that. I would have talked to Ryan, but he doesn't work here anymore, so.
I would have asked Ryan. I think a number of us are looking at this going, how if we make this, let's say, the law of Whatcom County, how do we avoid not doing that?
Yeah. And I'm still thinking also about the point that Commissioner McClendon raised, because I was thinking along the same lines. It almost seems like this little 5 doesn't belong here. It belongs as part of this. So, move this down here and say, including ditches that are considered streams when they meet these.
Can you hold that thought for a moment, and then Commissioner Mayberry and then Commissioner Lund would like to speak. So Commissioner Mayberry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd be happy to have staff maybe go back through this and try and remove some of the unintended. Maybe it is intentional, I don't know. But we have so many ditches in the county. They're along every road through lots of properties, not just along roads. And the majority of them don't have water in them for, I don't know, 3/4, 90% of the year. We're creating a massive amount of new critical areas with this. So if there's a way that staff could maybe go back and make this a little less impactful. I understand ditches that have water in them all year round. I think that makes sense. That's basically a stream to me. But all the dry ditches that we have in the county that only see water in them for maybe a month out of the year, I'm not sure we want to be that extreme.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, our intent was not to regulate every single ditch, but just the ones that seem to matter, and carry any pollutants to our shellfish habitat areas, and et cetera. So I just put a note here for Brian and I to work on this some more and see if we can't come up with a better solution to that. And we just present it to you at your hearing.
Commissioner Lund, go ahead. Thanks for being patient.
Well, listening to Ryan speak about his intent when he was crafting this and trying to define typo waters, the piece of qualifying language that stands out to me that helps mark it for distinction would be adding in that heavily modified, because that seems to distinguish it from just like a regular ditch. So for example, if we had typo waters, including all segments of heavily modified aquatic areas. So I don't know where it goes or how to say that, but that was the part of what he just said that kind of helped me better understand.
Yeah. Cliff, are you looking at that at all, or?
Yeah, I just put that same note in my comments there for us to work on.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Masseri.
Yeah, just so I can keep this straight in my head, it feels like we're almost talking about two issues at the same time. We applied buffers potentially to these certain ditches or culverts or whatever, pipes, whatever it is, because of the concern of contaminants getting in, which I agree is a concern. But a buffer isn't always just about contaminants. Buffers are because of the other impacts of development around things. So I agree we don't want to get the contaminants in there, but a buffer is a broader tool than just preventing contaminants in the stream is how I think about it. And maybe I'm missing something there, but does that make sense?
Yeah, because I mean, a buffer with just grass in it could keep the contaminants out. Trees and everything are for shade for fish. So,
Commissioner Hanson.
Well, if I am going to approve some changes, I would be very cautious that they would be along the lines of removing ditches that are only, there's a word for it, but only seldom used, rather than ones in which basically are a stream that's been rerouted. So I'm particularly sympathetic with agriculture not being messed up, but I think if someone's going to build a house, having a vegetative buffer down to the stream ditch shouldn't be the worst hardship in the world, and it's something they don't have to mow. But I would say that all ditches aren't next to the road, and even when they are, it's bad enough that we have all the stuff coming off cars, but we don't need a lawn fertilizer going in the ditches too. And recently when I was up near Linden, I was very unfavorably impressed with the orange color of the roadside ditches. And I think we could do a better job to keep that from happening. And so I would like to keep most of these provisions. And if we're one of the 2 counties with the best protection, I think that's a feather in our cap.
And Commissioner Mayberry.
Sorry, I don't have anything to say.
And Ryan, did you have a comment for us?
And no, I'm fine.
Commissioner Desmonte.
I just want to say for clarification, our mechanism in land use code to deal with contamination is buffers. We don't have a way to, in land use code, to require, regular monitoring of ditches. It happens to some extent, but it's all voluntary. And so there is no way of keeping nutrients out of ditches, being basically besides limiting what kind of activity happens near them. And that's why we see all kinds of stuff in ditches. I see it all the time. And it's not just in Linden, it's all over the county.
Commissioner Mayberry.
I just want to make the point that you're not supposed to put nutrients in the ditches. If you do see anything like that, Commissioner Desmonte, you can let me know. I'm on one of the WIDs. We're supposed to be tasked with tracking that kind of stuff down. But when it does happen, it's not typically having much to do with how close applications are being done to a ditch. It has more to do with surface runoff after a large rain. But that's still obviously a problem. So if you see any, give me a ring.
So
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I'd like to ask Cliff another question, and I fear to ask this because we're going a little bit, it's going a little bit astray, but living down at the bay, almost none of us fertilize. I have a really great weed puller that I use that you don't have to bend over to pull them, but we don't fertilize and we don't pesticide or herbicide. And is there any way to put anything in here that requires educational program? You got these ditches, don't do this stuff. We don't down there, and we know where it's going, exactly where it goes, so we don't do it.
Well, I don't know that putting in an educational component into the regs that are regulating development is the appropriate place, but I like the thought. And I know the shellfish protection districts and a number of, and what's that program?
Whatcom Watershed Information Network.
Yeah, there's a bunch of groups that do this kind of stuff. Frankly, I think it's just a matter of developing it and getting it out there. But this is a set of regulations for when people are developing. So I think it would just get lost in here for one thing.
So where I see we're at is that staff is going to come back with some other language here. Are we okay with that? Where do we want to go to, Commissioner? Commissioner Mayberry.
Yeah, that's pretty much the last thing I've got. So it'd be great to hear back from staff. My biggest concern is those ditches that are dry for the majority of the year. So if we can figure out a way to carve those out, not make such a big impact, that would be great.
Yep. All right, we will see what we can come up with. So I think we got the direction the commission tends to be leaning. Safe, but not too overly regulatory.
All right, Commissioner Hanson.
I remember the term we use in forestry, intermittent flows.
All right, are you Commissioners, are you ready to move on from this and maybe a little bit of discussion about adding rules for our shoreline management hearing in late April on speaker rules and things like that for our bylaws? Is it okay to add that for the next meeting? Thumbs up?
Yep.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, Commissioners, do you have anything else? Commissioner McClendon?
Do we need to vote on this change of the definitions of floodplain and floodway?
Thank you.
Whoop.
Would be appropriate, some discussion about it.
Yeah, let me get it back up for you. Oops. SMP. Planning Commission. And where'd you go? And share. All right, I'm back up and running. I'm not sure who's waiting for on whom.
Yes. Commissioner McClendon, do you have an opinion here for us?
How about if I move to adopt the changes proposed by staff on the definitions of floodplain and floodway per the memo?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adopt the definitions proposed by staff on floodplain and floodway. Is there discussion? Seeing no discussion, no hands up. Tammy, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Bartel,
Yes.
Commissioner Desmani,
Yes.
Commissioner Hanson,
Yes.
Commissioner Jackson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lund,
Yes.
Commissioner Mayberry,
Yes.
Commissioner McClendon,
Yes.
Commissioner Mosseri,
Yes.
Commissioner Barton.
Yep.
That carries 9-0.
Okay. So commissioners, would you like to move on to something else? Would you like to adjourn? No, just- Commissioner Desmani?
I think, Chair, did you want to discuss the rules for the public hearing or?
We could do that. The only reason that I thought about adding it to our agenda for next time, I think that the 3 hearings we have will be small and we won't have to worry about trying to get everybody in that wants to speak. And I thought maybe to have it on our agenda that we wanted to talk about how we were going to handle the public hearing might give somebody a chance in the public to say, hey, we want to be able to weigh in. And so we could.
So you're suggesting that for the first meeting in April then?
I'm suggesting we discuss it for the first meeting in April, that we have it on our agenda so that the public can see that. And it
I'd
will,
support that. Yeah.
okay. Commissioner Mosseri?
Yeah, just to ask if people have suggestions on how to carry it out, maybe you send that out ahead of time so we can all kind of think about it.
Thank you. That's a great idea.
So, Mr. Chair,
Yes,
if you're going to write something up, remember that your packet goes out next Tuesday, Wednesday, so you should need it by then.
thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Commissioners, is everybody okay with adjourning the meeting? Little thumbs up. Okay, thank you. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.